So this is the first step for text explosion. So I'll create some text that I'm going to explode from the screen. I'll center that, and I'll also just push things up a small bit there, because I'm going to need to see a little bit more down here than I do up here. That's fine. Okay, so the text explosion is going to happen through animators. So the first thing that I do, as with any kind of text animation, is open up the text properties and go to my animator and decide exactly what it is I want to animate. So animation is just changing properties over time, so I need to find the property to change. Now if this text is going to come out towards me, then I know it's going to need to move in Z space. So in order for me to move this in Z space, one of the first things I have to do is I have to enable this as 3D text. Now the 3D checkbox will not actually work for me here. The 3D checkbox is for moving the text as a whole, and I can leave that checked if I want, but I'm going to deselect it and go to the animate menu and instead enable per character 3D. And that will get me back my 3 dimensions, but it will also show me each character as well, broken into its own little object. So that's the first step, and you'll see that the 3D checkbox now has 2 little cubes in it as opposed to 1. Next thing I'm going to do is select that property. So it's going to be a position property, and that position property is going to need to change on the Z. So now that I've enabled per character 3D, I see I have an extra property here, the Z property. So I'm going to bring it forward, and forward is a negative value, so I give it minus 3000. Actually, I'll give it a smaller number to begin with so we can still see it on screen. So I give it minus 1000. And it's just moved a little bit forward, but I can still see all the text. Okay, at the moment it all moved because my range selector, it spans the entire width of my text object. I'm not going to use a range selector for this. I'm going to just use a wiggly selector, so I'll delete that. I could probably leave it here, it wouldn't do any harm. It would just basically say everywhere inside in this range make the wiggly selector work, but just to keep it clean I'm going to get rid of it. And I'll add a selector, and straight away you'll see that the text changes in appearance, because the default mode for wiggly selector is to kind of do this. Okay, so it's oscillating up to, but not past, minus 1000 on Z, and going back as far as plus 1000 in the Z as well. So that's not what I want here. So the first thing I need to change is the wiggles per second. Now if I want to just use this as a randomizing function and not as an oscillating function, it's as simple as changing it from 2 wiggles to 0. And what that does is it creates a kind of a static randomized effect on my text. So how does it explode? Well, all of the exploding is going to be done not through the actual oscillating, but through the animation of my min and my max amounts. So how do I do that? First of all, if I change them both to 0, the text basically appears in its original state. So nothing has changed. Okay, so it's basically it's the maximum amount of change towards minus 1000 is 0, so it's not changing in that direction. The minimum amount is not plus 1000, it's also not changing, so it's 0. So if I wanted to create the effect of this moving off in Z space in a kind of a random sense, I could first of all keyframe the max amount from 0 to 100. And you'll see now that it kind of comes off. I'll speed that up. So it moves off towards those random points between 0 and 1000. At this point I could probably go down and change that to minus 3000, just so I can see a more exaggerated explosion. Okay, I'll need to change a few things here. So I've changed the wiggles per second. The next thing I could change to make it seem much more organic, natural and random appearing is to change the correlation from 50 down to 0. So now when I hit it, it should go off in a very random kind of a way. If I was to change that, for example, to 100, it wouldn't look very much like an explosion at all. Okay, now at this point what I could do is I could play around with the amount. I can bring it down to a higher amount. I'll try minus 4,000. Oops, that's 400. And you'll see that it kind of starts to move off the screen, but I'm still getting some letters left behind. That's where the min amount comes in. If you imagine that the max amount is pushing them out initially, and if you were to keyframe the min amount or the minimum amount, then it would have the effect of kind of catching those last few and pushing them out after the max amount. So I'll change that keyframe that from 0 up to 100. That's not 100. And you'll see that they're gone. Now I need to change that around a little bit, just so that they start to go off the screen before the min kicks in and takes those last few stragglers away. I'll just stretch it out, holding down Alt just to slow it down. Okay, so that is the movement in Z, and it's just a case of playing around with the max amounts and the min amounts and just setting one static position for the wiggly selector to take them off towards that value at different in a different kind of a phase, as it's called. So each one is in a different point in phase as they move away. Now there's more to this than simply pushing it off straight out in Z space. I'm also going to need it to kind of, if I want this to look like an explosion, then it's going to have to go off in pretty much all directions. Now at present, I don't need to worry too much about the X things moving off to the left and the right, because the movement of the text towards the camera already gives the impression that they're moving off to the left and the right. But I am concerned about the Y, because they look like they're kind of sliding along an invisible pane of glass towards me, and that's not very explosion-like. So I need to change another property. I need to change the Y. Now the first instinct here might be to add the property Y, or sorry, to change the Y property on the position that I already have here. So then I could use the same wiggly selector to change the Z position and the Y position. So if I push that up, for example, I go into negative values, and straight away you'll start to see, hang on a minute, this is actually only exploding in one direction on the Y-axis. And that makes sense, because all of my movement is based on the min amount and the max amount, and if they're only going into positive values in terms of 0 to 100%, then they're only going to go in one direction. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to find a way of animating the Y so that it goes up to its max amount and then down into negative values for its min amount, so that it explodes upwards and downwards. So in order for me to do that, I need to create a new animator. So I could name this animator at this point Explode Z, and I'm going to rename this shortly to take in a new effect, but just to keep tabs on exactly what it is I'm doing with these animators as I go, I'm going to name it for what it's currently doing. So I'll deselect that, go up to my animator, and again get the position, but this is a different animator, so I have access to an entirely new set of positions for this. So if I now change that value, actually first of all I need to add a new wiggly selector and go through a few of the steps that I did previously. 0, correlation 0, and what I'll do is I'll leave the max and min at 100 and minus 100. So now when I drag that position in one direction, the text goes in both, and that is because it's going max amount 100. 100 of minus 452 is minus 452, and the min amount is minus 100, and minus 100 of minus 452 is 452. So it's going up and down purely based on the max and min amounts that have been set here. So from here on in, it's a similar case of keyframing and adjusting my max and min. Yeah. And now it starts to go off in all directions. So that's looking more like I expect it to look. Now I might make it slightly less so that it doesn't go off the screen as much. Minus 250 might do the job. Okay, that's better. Now the last thing I'm going to need to do is to make the text rotate as it explodes off the screen. Now instead of, okay, I'll name this animator first. I'll call it move off on Y. Now I'm just thinking this through. I'm thinking, okay, well, do I need a new animator for my rotation, or can I just slot in that property in with either of these two animators here? Now I can probably put it in with explode Z, so I'll try that. I'll go down to, or up to the add property rotation, and I'm going to say, okay, well, as this explodes off in Z between 0% and 100%, then I can use that also to dictate the rotation. So I'll click 1 revolution on the X, 1 revolution on the Y, and 1 revolution on the Z, and I'll just see how that looks. Okay, so that's starting to rotate the text as it goes. Now I'm spotting there's a problem with this. It's not rotating in a very natural kind of a way. It's kind of taking it's almost as if there's a weight at the bottom of each letter and it's swinging the letter around that weight. I want it to rotate around its center so it looks like it's just flicking off. So the way I do that is go right back up to the top to my text property section, into more options, my anchor point grouping. I'll drag that back up, and it's very hard to see there, so I'll just zoom in so you can see those anchor points are the little X's. And if I drag those anchor points up, you'll see that all of my rotation, or if I had scale or anything like that, it's going to happen around that center point now. And there we go. So now the text is doing its thing in a much more natural kind of a way. Now the last step with this is to create that depth of field. Now the thing to remember is that you're always looking through a camera, granted, but if you want to affect the properties of that camera, lens, iris, shutter speed, all that kind of stuff, you need to create a camera. So I'll create a new camera. I'll enable depth of field and I'll click OK. Now I'll pull the playhead out to where the text is kind of close enough, and at this point go to my camera options, depth of field on, aperture. Now in reality the camera actually, every time you create a new camera in After Effects, it takes the settings of the previous camera that was created, so it's actually showing me what I've already done with a previous class. But basically my blur level can be taken from 0 to 100 or higher. Depth of field on, and aperture is bumped up. So in real terms, the aperture is what you would use in a camera to get you a nice soft focus in the foreground, or to get a shallow depth of field. But you can add a blur level to that then in After Effects to further enhance that. And there we have it. So that is text that you could, if you wanted to, you could take these two layers, you could just copy and paste them in on top of that door clip, and then start adding in those extra kind of things to it. Now, just before we leave the text animators, there's a couple of other options that I'll just talk you through quickly, and that's phase. Now I'll open up a new, actually I'll finish this, I'll start a new screen capture for that. So this is just finishing on the end result of the text explosion.